And welcome everyone. As we get ready to dive into a deeper look at how we can enhance our game development skills, we of course have had a great way of looking at how to do 2D game development, but now let's take our skills with Unity and apply them into a 3D manner. So the first thing, of course, we're going to need to do is install Unity 6. If you use my Game Design 1 curriculum, you notice that we use 2022. But here we're going to use Unity 6, so it's a slightly newer version. And one of the things you'll want to do is when you go to create your project, you'll want to create a universal 3D project. And we're going to call this one Maze Dodger to start off. And we're going to go ahead and create that project. Just go ahead and create that on your machine. Now, once you, of course, are in Unity here, you, of course, will be able to see some things that are very familiar to you, but there are things that are going to be different as well. Now, by default, if we have the default layout here, we can see, of course, the layout we have. Now, if you have some other tabs or something in here, for example, from Game Design 1, if you had done that, you might have some of that layout brought over. And if you need to change it back, you just use the default here, and you can change that layout. And of course, you can move all these tabs around. You can customize your inspector how you want it to be. For example, you'll see tabs that are very familiar. So we have inspector, hierarchy, project console. I have my game tab, my scene tab. And again, I can drag and drop and I can resize these different things however I want them to be. So for example, I might want a little more scene space here to be able to take a look. I may not want as large of a hierarchy. But one of the things we can start seeing automatically when we start looking at the scene, if I open up my sample scene here, we'll see that we have three elements. We have our main camera, we have a directional light, and a global volume. Now this is a little different than when we were working in our 2D space previously, but it's automatically going to start giving us some things that we see that are familiar. For example, when we look at the main camera, we can see that this is a camera type. It has a transform element, and it's going to be really good for us when we're looking at positioning our scene. But let's go ahead and just jump right into creating an object here in our 3D space. So let's go ahead and create an object in here. So let's go ahead and create a 3D object. And for our purposes, let's just go ahead and create a cube. And you can see it's giving us the prompt to rename it. So let's go ahead and make this into something that we can make. Now, obviously, you can make a bunch of different things here in Unity, but I'm going to do something very simple. How about just like a car? Now, in this space here, one of the things, of course, we can look at here when we start looking at our world is you'll notice that it's a little different canvas than we're used to. If you have a middle mouse button, if you click and hold on that mouse button, it allows you to kind of pan around the world very nicely. If you hold down the Alt key and left click, that allows you to actually kind of pan up and down. You can go left and right. If I do Alt and the right button, you can see now that turns into a zoom, so I can zoom in or zoom out. Now, ultimately, there's lots of different ways to kind of get in here and kind of mess around. For example, right now I'm using the right mouse button to kind of pan around. But what I want to kind of focus in on is actually going to be these controls here. So we have three different axes here. We have a red, green, and blue. So what do those mean here? Because we didn't really have to deal with 3 dimensions when we worked in a 2D space. So whenever we are looking at these axes here, the red axis is our X, and so that allows us to move the object in the X direction. The Y is labeled here with the green, so that's our up and down. And then our Z axis, which is things move closer and farther away from us, that is going to be represented here by the blue axis. Now, of course, I've moved this around, but I can reset that position here by using my transform, and you can see my cube is once again centered. Now, just as a reminder, you can still manually change these values just like we did in the 2D space. So over here, of course, we have our transform window like we just saw. We can come in here and type this. So for example, if I want to shift the position of this cube, let's say 10 units, you can see once I type 10 in there, it moves over. Let's just go ahead and set that back to 0. And actually, you can see there's actually something hiding behind this cube here. That's our global volume. I'm actually going to just take that global volume, grab the Z-axis, and just move back, just so we can see that cube a little bit more by itself here. We're not getting confused with what is actually going on here in this Unity space. Now, if we remember at the beginning, we called this a car, but right now we just kind of have this cube here. We really don't have very much of a car shape, but we have other tools at our disposal here, such as scale tool, rect tool, transform, etc., that we can use to actually transform this. So, for example, if I use my scale tool here, I now have the ability to stretch this object in different directions. So, for example, If I want to stretch this object out so it's a little bit longer, I can do that, or I can make it a little bit wider. I have options now where I can kind of play with this. So I might say, you know, this looks like a pretty good shape here for me starting out with a object. Now, what about the position of this though? One thing to keep in mind is right now half of this cube is kind of just here. So if we look at our position, we're set to the Z, so that looks good. But it's just a brick. How can we get other objects in here to really make this more car shape? Well, we can come in here and create 3D objects. Let's do a cylinder. And you can see we've added this very large cylinder shape here. It's in fact larger than my brick, so I might actually want to scale my brick up a little bit here. So let me undo that move. I want to instead use the scaling of this. So let's actually make that just a little bit bigger here and stretch it out. And so now when I use my cylinder, I can, of course, use the different tools that I have available to move that around so that way I can make this into something, for example, more like a wheel. So you can probably start seeing how some of this is coming together. So let's go ahead and take this object here that we just did. Let's go ahead and rotate that 90 degrees. And so you can see now we are starting to see kind of more of a wheel shape. If I want to scale this down here, we can, of course, make it maybe just a little bit more wheel-like in nature. And then, of course, we're able to move that into where we want that to be. So if I want to snap that a little bit closer to my object here, you can see, of course, here's my brick, here's my wheel, so I can bring that on in. And so you can start seeing how these objects here are really starting to come together. So right now my wheel, of course, is floating here just a little bit. So I might want to bring that Z-axis down. So let's take that Z. Oh, it's not the Z-axis. Let's take it back to 2. Always forget about this. We got to just adjust that. We want to bring it down in the Y direction. There we go. So if we bring that in, and we can now tuck that up next to our shape. You can see we still have a little bit of a gap here, but this is something that we can work on improving as we bring our different pieces of this car that we are assembling together. Now, while this is a pretty cool start of a object here, in fact, I'm going to bring that wheel down just to make it a little more comical. We can do more than simply just insert these primitive shapes. So if you recall, we have different things in here, such as our assets where we've been able to work in. We've created folders before to organize things. But just for this demonstration purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it right here in the parent folder. And what we're going to do is create a material. So I'm just going to go to create material. And I'm just going to call this a color. How about color 1? All right, and now it is a material that is set up here. You can see we also have different options that are available for that material. Now, this color, of course, gives us some options and things to play with. But what we're going to do is something very basic today because we aren't adding anything too complex. And we'll get into more of these options as we dive deeper. But let's look at our base map color here. If I click on that, we get a familiar color wheel that we've seen before. And what we want to do is effectively come in here and be able to change this. Now, so let's go ahead and make this more of a darker tone because, well, wheels are typically rubber and rubber is usually kind of a darker tone. And so I'm going to go kind of for a dark gray. So let's just bring that down. The nice dark gray looks good to me. And so now that this is here, I can apply that to what I want. So if I look at my list of objects here in my scene, let's rename our cylinder here. And we'll call this the wheel. And now what we can do is we can take this color here, and you'll see that instead of being this dull gray that we had before, we can actually just drag this color to the wheel, and you'll see that the wheel now has that color applied to it. If I really want to make this very obvious here, I can move it a little bit closer, but I can even make that, let's say, something very vibrant here. So let's just say I make it something like red. You can see how that starts to really stick out there. And you can see how, if I play around with my color wheel, how that's going to affect the color of that material. And so by making it something dark, it then allows me to manipulate this vehicle. All right, so now we've kind of established the basics of what we need to make something like this. Now, obviously, this is not going to be the thing we need for our game, but this is a good exercise just to get us comfortable working in the 3D space of Unity. One thing I want to, of course, show, just to remind you, if I want to duplicate something, if I select my object and do Control-D, I should be able to replicate this object here. And now I have a second wheel that I can then slide forward and I can move into place here. So that's a very quick way for me to be able to control that. so that way I can have another object that is here available for me to use. So with this in place here, let's go ahead and turn it over to you for a second. I'm going to pause the video. What I want you to do, though, is go ahead and create your own car. I'll make my own interpretation here. And feel free to create some new materials, add some more objects. Go ahead and make something that looks kind of vaguely like a car shape. And let's just check back in and see what you created. All right, and so here's what I came up with. Something real quick and simple just to kind of demonstrate just some of the different things that we can do real quickly here in Unity. Now, obviously, you can create assets outside of Unity and bring them in, which eventually we will get to. But this is a good starting point just for us to get familiar with playing around with just how the 3D space is very different from what we might be used to in the 3D space.